you to this very important and timely symposium as a part of Cosmos Dialogue Distinguished Speakers Lecture Series titled Values or Their Absence in Foreign Policy. I am Noshita Noreen and would personally like to thank each of you for taking the time to attend this extraordinary gathering, especially our distinguished speakers and panelists. It has been very important for Cosmos Foundation to organize the dialogue series as we continue to grow and adapt. Some of you will have attended previous installments on various issues ranging from relations between Bangladesh and the UN, Bangladesh and the European Union, Bangladesh and India, Bangladesh and China, Bangladesh and UK, Bangladesh and Canada, to the Rohingya crisis, to Baul music and philosophy. Cosmos Foundation is always open to new ideas that can help transform society and lead to a better future. And your support along this journey is extremely important for us. So without further delay, let me thank each of you again for enriching the occasion with your presence. And with that, I would like to hand it over to the chairman of Cosmos Foundation, Mr. Inayatullah Khan, to deliver the opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning. First of all, I would request everybody to put their mobile devices either switch off or put them on silence mode, please, please. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I deem it a great pleasure and honor to be able to welcome you all to a symposium under the Distinguished Speakers Series on a subject of relevance in regional and global politics. Today, we shall be focused on values and how they drive the formulation and practice of foreign policy. Many of you may recall that we had some preliminary discussions on it when the topic emerged last month following the address delivered by former President Danilo Turk of Slovenia. On that occasion, we had informed you that we would plan an event entirely dedicated to this important thematic issue. Today, I'm happy to say that we have delivered on our promise. Foreign policy is one of the principal tools of statecraft, and today, I'm very pleased to have here one of the most respected and astute practitioners of diplomacy, the art of foreign policy, Krishnan Srinivasan. During his long and illustrious career in the Indian Foreign Services, Krish rose to the top of his profession as Indian Foreign Secretary in 1994-1995. He went on to take up the post of Deputy Secretary General of the Commonwealth in London and served in that position till 2002. He was educated at Bedford School and Christchurch, Oxford. He was appointed to the Indian Foreign Services in May 1959. His early postings included Oslo, Beirut, Tripoli. He was India's ambassador/High Commissioner to Zambia and Botswana, Nigeria, Benin and Cameroon, the Netherlands, and Bangladesh. He has also written a number of books, both fiction and non-fiction, including one on Bangladesh, drawing on his experiences and observations during his posting here as High Commissioner from 1989 and 1992. I'm sure many of you may have read the book. For those who haven't, I would highly recommend. The book is titled The Jamdani Revolution, Politics, Personalities, and Civil Society in Bangladesh. Today, he is here to deliver what promises to be a highly interesting lecture on values and lack thereof in foreign policy. I'm really intrigued by what he reveals in the lack thereof a bit. As always, I look forward to the interesting plenary session to follow Ambassador Srinivasan's address that Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry will moderate. As I look around the room, I see many ambassadors, many scholars, and many professionals from foreign policy, apart from friends who take a natural interest in this kind of event. I would like to announce to you, the Friends of Cosmos, that Ambassador Srinivasan has honored us by accepting the position of membership of Cosmos Advisory Board. I would also like to take this opportunity to inform you that two other eminent international personalities who have joined our advisory board are Dr. Danilo Turk, former president of Slovenia, and Ambassador George Moose of the United States, fellow at Harvard University Institute of Politics. Your support through your presence and your invaluable contributions have really helped to elevate the level of each dialogue, and I'm proud to say today that Cosmos Dialogue Series has really carved a niche for itself in the nation's discourse. Friends and colleagues, today we have a chance to discuss a topic that is not driven by the course of current affairs, nor tied to the fortunes of one nation or two. For centuries, the way a nation has related to the world has been influenced by the values that it had bred and nurtured at home. Any student of history will know when values diminish domestically, the clout of that country reduces internationally. When the West dominated global politics, it was believed that the values preached and practiced in Europe and America were accorded preeminence. Eurocentrism was the order of the day. Today, however, we are witnessing, if not a decline of the West, but certainly a rise of the East, with Asian powers playing an increasingly critical role. The values they practice, therefore, have gained considerable international salience. So what set of values determine current global politics? Western? Eastern? Or are the interactions between the two producing a universal consensus? It is my hope that by the end of the deliberations today, we shall find some of the answers that we seek. I believe our deliberations are also timely for another reason. In recent times, we have been experiencing a rise of populism in different parts of the world. This development is tending to exacerbate the differences between us and them. This seems to be gathering momentum in a wide range of otherwise dissimilar countries. Sometimes they espouse their unique values and ideologies as well. But unfortunately, these can be threatening to global stability and social order. This phenomenon merits observation and study with a view to addressing them in a positive manner so as to manage their negative impacts. Earlier on my remarks, I had mentioned the publication Values in Foreign Policy, Investing in Ideals and Interests, co-edited by Ambassador Chris Srinivasan, along with two others, Professor James Mayall and Sanjay Pulipaka. 17 contributors from around the world have examined the implications of what the title contains. They have not all agreed, nor were they meant to, but they have provided a mosaic of ideas that show us the broad parameters within the nations and peoples connect with each other in our present times. I would strongly commend the volume to all interested students of foreign policy. To our guests and supporters, I'm pleased to announce that we have another very interesting event for you lined up to take place on Saturday, 29th of Feb, at the same time and the same venue. From a thematic topic, we will move on to a practical one, but just as significant. We have been noting of late the burgeoning relationship between Bangladesh and Europe. In line with the development, we will examine Bangladesh's relationship with an important segment of Europe, the Nordic countries. Our speakers on that event will be the ambassadors of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. I do hope all of you can join us and enrich our discussions as always you do. With these few remarks, I shall hand over the microphone to our chair of the symposium, Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry, Principal Research Fellow, ISAS, University of Singapore, and our former Foreign Secretary, a renowned diplomat turned scholar. He too has reflected and written on the subject at hand, and I'm therefore invite him to share a few of his thoughts on it as he chairs and conducts the symposium. Thank you, and over to Dr. Iftikhar Chaudhry.
Thank you, Nath. Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all, and welcome to yet another of our events, to which all of you have been relentlessly offering your support. We are deeply beholden to you for that reason. I should be derelict of my responsibilities were I to begin without expressing my gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Srinivasan, whom I have known and admired for long, for being with us here today, of course. And as you have heard, he's a person of prodigious capabilities, and I'm sure, like me, all of you are looking forward to his address. I would take up a few minutes at the outset to speak to something that Inayat has mentioned in his initial remarks, which is the values and foreign policy, and in which I too have an abiding interest. Western literature in international relations categorized relevant analysis and policy practices into three sets of theoretical activities. First, were the idealists. They were mainly Anglo-Saxons who dominated the thinking as the modern era unfolded. They agreed that the system of international relations that existed had given rise to the First Great War. However, they felt that these could be transformed into a fundamentally more peaceful and just order. They were remarkable in the intensity of their dedication to a particular vision of what should happen. Those of you who are familiar with international relations literature would recall Edward Hallett Carr, E.H. Carr, who taught at Aberystwyth College those days. Now I think it's the University of Wales, who had set up the first ever department of international relations in a university. The idealists were challenged by a second school, the realists. The realists agreed that power politics was not bad in itself and sought to establish the legitimacy of the appeal to national interests. They believed universal moral principles could not be applied to state actions. The third school was the social scientific one. It moved away from the soft social analysis to the hard ones for methodological guidance. They were intellectually eclectic, coming from different disciplines. Their chillingly rational analysis flowed from systems and games theory, cybernetics, mathematical logic, physics, and simulation. However, the threefold classification that I just referred to were not watertight compartments in terms of individuals, ideas, or periodization. The Western biasing theory was moderated by thought leaders in post-colonial Asia. In the real world, new leaders and thinkers of this age sought to shun the conflicts of major global protagonists by espousing the concept of non-alignment. These championed the notion that issues were to be judged on individual merits of each case rather than on the basis of any a priori views. In other words, views that were thought up beforehand. These eventually found fruition in what has now been called Asian values, which led to what is also known as ASEAN Way. Asian values, or the ASEAN way, was seen as emphasizing consensual approach, communitarianism, social order and harmony, respect for elders, discipline, a paternalistic state, and the primary role of government in economic development. The influence of Confucianism and other Eastern philosophies were profound. These were pitted against the so-called Western values, such as those linked to individualism, transparency, accountability, social competitiveness, a universal outlook, and universalist practices, with an emphasis on private initiatives in economic development. Eventually, and this is responding to one of the points that Anayat had made, eventually these two streams coalesced, as if it were, into some kind of an intellectual and a behavioral synthesis. The country I live and work in, Singapore, is a very good example of how they assisted the fusion of these two sets of ideas into one streamline of activity, mental activity. In my view, therefore, dichotomizing thoughts and policies on foreign relations between Western and Eastern values is unrealistic. In this globalized world, borders between compartments of thoughts are fast eroding. Protestant work ethics or Calvinistic practices in Europe can today be seen as akin to being to many elements of Confucianism. Factors of production require unimpeded mixing, whether they are motivated by the so-called Asian or ASEAN or European or Western values. No school or region can claim exclusive right to any particular value. For instance, human rights have an universal appeal and relevance, while the natural tendency of a state actor may be to try and shape the world in accordance with its own fundamental precepts. There are bound to be restraints imposed on this by such realities as size and capabilities. Global politics, just as domestic politics, operate within the realm of what is possible and prudent. Now, and I think your remarks, you made a reference to populism. Populism, which is exacerbating, as you said, the differences between them and us. It's true that this impedes appropriate management of diversity in larger nations of multiple ethnicities and faith. We see this now in many parts of the world, in societies once considered worthy of emulation for their tolerance of differences. We see popularity morph into populism or nativism for purposes as minor as electoral gains. In doing so, catastrophic consequences are often overlooked. There is a term that is gaining currency at present that describes this phenomena. It is called civilizationism. It is defined as the use of one's culture as a weapon of exclusivity. Civilizationism is frequently based on myths erected on falsification. It includes attempts at rewriting history to serve authoritarian purposes. These are obviously some of the problems that our current times continues to confront, and problems that require addressing. The mighty Rabindranath Tagore wanted us to live in a world that has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. In other words, he himself wanted to live in such a world. Should we not all then aspire to that noble ideal? I thank you. Okay, I will now assume the position of chair and will, with your assistance, of course, conduct this event. It gives me great pleasure to invite Ambassador Chris Srinivasan to make his keynote remarks. Chris, would you like to go over there? So you'll have 45 minutes or so, 40 minutes. and then we'll open for discussions around the table.
It's such a pleasure to be back in Dhaka, especially yesterday, Ekushe, the World Mother Tongue Day. Shadinoto Tumi Shahid Minare Omar Ekushe February Ujjol Shaba. My very grateful thanks to Mr. Inayatullah Khan for his very kind remarks at the beginning and for inviting me to be here at this very prestigious Cosmos Foundation lecture series. And my thanks also to Ambassador Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Chaudhry for his agreement to chair this session and for his tremendously panoptic remarks at the beginning. You will allow me to say that I might respectfully disagree with some of the comments you made, but I'm sure you expected that in any case. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your kind attendance today. I'm very grateful to you for having spared the time to be here. Though I should begin, I suppose, with a disclaimer that I don't fall into the advertised category of distinguished speakers. I hope that the organizers have not willfully raised any unwarranted expectations. Let's start by saying or asking what are values. Values are principles or standards of behavior by which good and bad, right and wrong might be assessed. Traditional inherited values are a common feature among individuals, and common behavior derives from a shared culture. Values can, of course, vary depending on generation, class, education, origin, tradition, and modernity. And they provide the motivation to influence outcomes both in the minds of people and governments. Although some values are shared across cultures, it is the contrast of values in different societies that accounts for many of the misunderstandings and misperceptions between countries. Leaders generally avoid talking about the value basis of their domestic policy, unless they're forced to, whereas they assert that their foreign policies embody national and/or universal principles. So we find that values in domestic policy are far less enunciated than they are in foreign policy. Because they're taken for granted and regarded as something relatively obvious. Domestic values, where they exist at all, seem only articulated when they are under threat, at which times they tend to be forcibly restated. This is taking place now, for example, in India, in the ongoing debate on secularism, liberalism, and Hindutva, the ideological dispute about what constitutes an open, liberal, representative democracy, affirmation of diversities, and the requirements of national unity. In India, where basic values are seen as being under threat by both sides of the divide, the result is in calls by the ruling authorities and the opposition to forcefully state that their values are time-honored. The BJP, the governing party, stressed the mother cow, Hindutva, Akhand Bharat, the exceptionality, with the opposition parties stressing secularism, equal rights, social harmony, and the rule of law. The curiosity, ladies and gentlemen, is that both parties to the debate invoke time-honored, centuries-old practices, spirituality, if not explicit religion, as the basis for their values, but they both rely on 20th century ideologues for their specific viewpoints. A discussion on domestic values is also taking place in the United Kingdom and the United States of America at this time, and also in all countries where a dark horse politician, previously unknown or with little political apprenticeship, springs into power, such as in America, France, Ukraine, or Brazil. In the United States, under Mr. Donald Trump, traditional American values are seen as being under threat by his opponents, including the sentiments of the national anthem and the Statue of Liberty. The acceptance of refugees, economic migrants, and asylum seekers is now widely unpopular in most other parts of the developed world, but in Germany, it stresses the acceptance of refugees as part of its values, because at least in part, in rejection of the Herrenvolk or superior race doctrine of the Nazi period, for which it continues to be penitent. Can different values in foreign policy be congruent when there is no universal seedbed from which values germinate? Some countries derive them from foundational charters, others from inherited codes of behavior, still others from religious sources, and nearly everyone from an admixture of all the above. Not all countries seek to propagate their values beyond their territorial borders, but every country firmly believes that its values have ethical standing. Of the Western countries, France and USA engage in vigorous values rhetoric, more than other countries, regarding themselves as the springboard for universal values based on the individual. The French Republic defined itself from the 1789 revolution in terms of the rights of man, and what today we would call secularism. Similarly, the United States identity is defined in terms of the 1776 Declaration of Independence and the Founding Fathers, hence the untouchable article entitling the American citizen to carry arms. If a truth is held to be self-evident, as in the Declaration's second paragraph, then obviously it is considered to be universal. Elsewhere, values are deeply embedded in local history and political culture. In foreign policy, countries are obliged to articulate their values in contrast with other countries, and values influence foreign policy, especially when a country is strong enough to project power or influence. Where countries have no foundation in national power, their values will not be taken seriously. Soft power can only sustain values up to a point, and one nation's values are meaningful only when they are recognized as such by other countries. Robert Kaplan, in the book that Mr. Inayatullah Khan mentioned, which I published on this subject last year, Robert Kaplan, as I say, mentions that for small and weak states, they can afford the luxury of only one value, and that value is to survive. And for all the other countries, a successful foreign policy cannot be implemented without being supported by values. Values that seem useful only for one country's interests could jeopardize its relationship with other countries which do not respect those interests. It's important for us, therefore, to recognize that values can lead either to agreement or to discord with other countries. Many problems in international relations arise because the stories on either side of a border cannot be reconciled. This is a consequence of nationalism. It is true that all nations generally pursue the same basic goals, namely the welfare and security of their populations and the um, protection of their national borders. But languages, political cultures, and social customs differ and create obstacles to cooperation and well-meaning efforts getting lost in translation. Values and ideologies have played an important role in international affairs. The Holy Roman Empire and the so-called free world of the Cold War era are historical examples of supranational entities which invoked values rather than interests as the primary impulse behind their conduct. More recently, in countries such as the United States, routinely cite the promotion of freedom and democracy in support of actions which are plainly based on their national interest. Essentially, the real drivers of foreign policy tend to be the advancement of economic or strategic advantage, no matter how the justifying narrative is couched. And so, Mr. Chairman, it is hard to surpass Lord Palmerston's famous dictum of 1848, which you no doubt will remember. He said, "We have no eternal allies, and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and it is our duty to follow those interests." In exceptional cases, values are so deeply held that promoting them becomes a national interest by itself. This probably applies to the Holy See's diplomacy, but it is frankly rather hard to find and cite other examples of this. Even Islamic republics like Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Mauritania, which describe themselves as Islamic republics, apparently do not place Islam at the center of their foreign policy priorities, to the exclusion of their interests. President Erdogan of secular Turkey said last week it was Turkey's responsibility to provide assistance to Muslims no matter where they are. But Turkey's interventions have killed many Syrian, Libyan, and Kurdish Muslims. I mentioned these countries not in any sense of disparagement, but only to point out that there is a universal tension between values and interests. Therefore, most of the time, our knowledge of the national interest of countries is all we need to understand, to know why they act in a particular way. We find that values, ethical or moral principles, and ideologies are usually not central to foreign policy decisions, giving way to a mix of national character along with security and foreign policy doctrines. Since self-interest is the very definition of statehood, the more important the issue, the more the perceived national interest plays a role. The debate between idealists and realists, which was mentioned by Ambassador Iftikhar Chaudhry, universalists and particularists, in the study of international relations is not new, and nor is it about to end. The former stressed the indispensability of values and principles that must govern relations among nations in an ideal world, whereas the latter believe that the national interest alone should be the driver of a state's behavior towards the rest of the planet. Actually, neither camp has a monopoly on wisdom. A path paved solely by values or naked self-interest is often not feasible to walk on. An individual needs both values and the capacity to identify and pursue interests within the framework, of course, of social and community norms and laws to secure happiness and harness his or her potential. That is exactly what states basically do in the international community. We live increasingly in a globalized world. Most intractable problems confronting humanity are no respecters of boundaries, which they cross with the ease of a mosquito or the coronavirus. It follows, therefore, that we need a new universalism, shared principles of a common humanity that will somehow allow us to prioritize our universal and international interest over parochial and national interests that divide us. So we must think of resolving, or at least managing, the problems, whether real or imagined, that arise from conflicting values, problems that divide rather than unite humanity. For this, we need to understand those whose historical experience, worldview, and cultural assumptions are different from our own and create obstacles to harmonious relations. In the book, Values and Foreign Policy, which has been mentioned by the chairman, the tension between values and interests is covered with reference to some of the leading countries today. The work explores the effect of the European Enlightenment, colonialism, modernity, and postmodernity in determining contemporary value systems, which are often uncomfortable in their interface with each other. Written, as was said, by 18 professionals, academics in the field of international relations, many believe that this book is the closest examination yet made of the impulses which drive foreign policies of some of the world's representative countries, touching on the legacies of religion, civilization, culture, and history. Every important country professes that its foreign policy follows an estimable and unique code of values. But common sense also tells us that every country is inevitably faced with the compulsion to constantly redefine and adjust those values to the realities of politics and circumstances. In other words, the competing values and interests of other countries that it encounters. The Americans talk loudly and endlessly about their fundamental values. The Europeans, other than the Nordic countries, whom you're going to hear, I think, next week, and the French, rather less so. And the Asian leaders, after Nehru, hardly at all. Why is that? I'd like to spend a few minutes examining this question further. Is it a question of the West versus the rest? I begin with the colonial experience. One context of the difference, of course, is colonialism. Western liberalism had 3 or 4 centuries of aberration during the imperial period, which has ended within the living memory of most people in this room, when the West had control over power, concepts, and values. If the Jews are marked by memories of the Holocaust, and South Africa by apartheid and religious discrimination, then I suggest that Asian nationalism is equally imprinted by the history of colonial oppression. The overhang of imperialism affects the Asian perception of Western liberal values because so many Western countries were involved in the colonial enterprise of opening up the third world markets. This historical experience leads Asians to consider the advocacy of universal values with understandable skepticism. Though the West has long believed that international cooperation can only take place under the auspices of a benign Western liberal democratic model. As Francis Fukuyama once mentioned, liberal democracy is the final destination for human evolution. Then I come to state sovereignty. Whereas Western liberals prioritized the individual over the nation, and Europe has even moved further towards a confederation transcending national borders, Asians, however, still hold firmly to the principles of Article 2 of the United Nations Charter in regard to the sanctity of state sovereignty. Regime change and color revolutions are unacceptable to the West, unacceptable to the rest, whereas for the West, especially the United States, the overseas priority is the pursuit of what the sixth President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, said: "America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all." Robert Kaplan, however, in this book suggests that when America ceases to endorse its values of free trade and democracy, it will inevitably cease to be a world power. The Washington Post on January the 15th last year put it rather condescendingly: "Nations, like children, crave predictability. They need to know the rules. The United States is like a parent. Other countries look to it for guidance and to enforce the rules." Well, this seems to me at times to be a reflection of the attitude of the current White House towards other countries. Nevertheless, and some might say inevitably, Western interventions after 1990 to export its values and political systems in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, Libya and Kosovo have undermined their validity, and humanitarian interventions have become viewed as establishing unofficial and eventually failed protectorates. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, bewailing that under Trump the USA could not be relied on to impose order, as she put it, leads to our obvious question: whose order? I now turn to religion and secularism. The West believes in the sanctity of individual rights, personal freedoms, and free speech over restraint, and reason over religion. Western values, ever since the French Revolution, have been secularized, in the sense that religion plays no part in policy. French President Macron last week said, in France, "There is no law against blasphemy. We have the right to blaspheme, criticize, or caricature religions." By contrast, Asian countries have a strong and abiding sense of religion, or rather, the civilizational impulses flowing from religious or spiritual traditions. Therefore, the secular liberalism of the West often seems to us to be opposed to or neglectful of faith. A replay of Charlie Hebdo or Pussy Riot, I'm sure I don't have to explain what that stands for, or those incidents that took place to such an audience as this. Charlie Hebdo or Pussy Riot, that is, the deliberate sacrilege and mocking of religious icons, are not to be countenanced or regarded as acceptable in the non-West. Universal norms and standards. The unequal cultural factor is very hard to eliminate. non-Western countries, due to tradition, history, and culture, do not necessarily share every value promoted as liberal and universal by the West. Many of the West's standards and norms are actually viewed by the rest as non-tariff barriers, disguised attempts to protect markets and high-cost manufactures. Liberal values are a legitimizing pillar of Western foreign policy. The West presents itself as norm-observing and norm-setting, emphasizing legal and procedural institutions. No one in the 16th to 20th centuries was trying, or for that matter able, to check the rise of the United States and Europe. And the power of the marketplaces made access to them conditional on acceptance of their values and norms. Let's keep in mind that 80% of the standards of international trade and global markets have been initiated by the West. The core of Eurocentrism, wrote the Chinese political analyst Wang Hui, was in establishing rules according to the Western interest and then universalizing them. Then we come to modernity. According to Partho Chatterjee, who you remember was the co-founder of Subaltern History, he said the forms of modernity will have to vary between different countries, depending on specific circumstances and social practices. Asians will forever remain consumers of universal modernity and never taken seriously as its producers. Ours is the modernity of the once colonized. Yes, each of us indeed has a different conception of modernity. As Bruno Marques, a former Portuguese minister, has mentioned in this book, we are all modern now. But there is tension between universal liberal values and modern interpretations of universality, between the postmodern West and the pre-modern rest. But let us never forget that Confucianism, Buddhism, and Islam were once considered universal in their time. The inherited assumptions of a backward rest and a progressive West have now much less purchase, and the rise of China is largely responsible for that change. It will not be easy for the halfway liberal societies, as Jürgen Habermas called the West, to set the world agenda now as it was 80 years ago. The individual and society. The values handed down through successive revolutions in the West, it is the English, the American, the French, and the Russian, laid down objectives for fulfilling the goal of liberty for the individual, whatever the later distortions of those ideals might have been. By contrast, I would suggest that there is nothing very clearly definable as Asian values. Asia is characterized more by political, religious, economic, cultural, and ethnic diversity than homogeneity. And the concept of Asian unity does not resonate in all parts of our continent. Given the differences between West Asia, South Asia, China, and Japan, there can be no Asian way other than emphasis on modernization and sovereignty, non-intervention, non-interference, top-down benevolent state philosophy, and communitarian values. Values that posit that society is a collective value system, placing national over individual interests. There is little core belief in the separation of powers or checks and balances, although it's a fact that nearly all Asian countries command a very high level of public political participation. Because of a multiplicity of religions and philosophical traditions, values are national rather than continental. But as a generalization, there is in Asia a sense of identity from civilization rather than the state, a work and savings ethic, a family-oriented community, emphasis on education, which takes a high proportion of our family disposable incomes, respect for age and hierarchy, the interest of society over the individual, the avoidance of loss of faith. Perhaps more properly, we should call them virtues rather than values. The most important distinction, however, is that Asia does not, or at least not yet, seek to articulate any universal values or to prescribe or propagate them outside national borders. My last point in this section, many civilizations. Liberalism, republicanism, socialism, nationalism, communism, and human rights were all inherited by us in the rest as foundational ideas from the West, which were exported to all corners of the globe on the backs of imperialism. Because recent history is all about the rise of the Western world, there is inherent resistance to the possibility that any other civilizational values might exist. And so traditional ways of thinking have come under pressure. There cannot be equal reciprocity when the West insists on the universality of its standards. International law and rules-based procedures cannot be grounded without genuine multilateralism or the logic of hard power. The declining influence of the West, mentioned earlier by the chairman, is seen in the European Union's primary goals of peaceful settlement of disputes and free and equal trade being currently somewhat at variance with the doctrines of Donald Trump's America First. In an increasingly non-Western world, it must be an illusion to claim centrality for 12% of the world's population. The Asian focus is on a multipolar world order, with the modernization path taking nations to different destinations. Globalization will not make political systems more liberal or democratic, and few of us can believe in any universal political convergence overcoming national interest. Democracy has its own ethnic and cultural characteristics. A more democratic China may be more aggressive. A more Buddhist Myanmar or Sri Lanka may be more intolerant. Free elections can and do result in anti-establishment, populist, nationalist leaders. In future, we may have a world where borders become increasingly diffuse, like the European Union, but cultural and civilizational differences remain, creating a permanently unstable compound of heterogeneous elements. This is exactly what urges us, compels us to have a better understanding of the values that motivate foreign policy. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say a few words about the book Values in Foreign Policy and convey a few thoughts cherry-picked from this book. Britain, never having been invaded since 1066, along with the Magna Carta and the empire on which the sun never set, and the Battle of Britain, gave the British Isles an innate sense of exclusiveness and exceptionalism. So fog in the Channel, the continent isolated, is an emblematic weather forecast that perfectly sums up the go it alone and British bulldog spirit. With this background of British values, it's hardly surprising that Brexit has come about. While most values, the term itself, you might consider, implies permanency, the Japanese and German values took an abrupt U-turn after World War II and their crushing defeat. And they had to make tactical compromises by making modesty and non-assertion new values in order to become acceptable to the international community. For example, Germany accepts that German is not the main language in the European Union, although the vast majority of Europeans speak German. Flashy military uniforms, which you've all seen on newsreels, are no longer to be seen in Germany. In Japan, the emperor's image remains supreme, but Bushido and Shintoism, both associated with pre-war Japan, have been completely given up. Japan's new restraint has paradoxically only underlined its uniqueness as the only country that has ever suffered a nuclear attack. Europe promotes liberal values abroad more than it practices them at home, since it uses protection and non-tariff barriers. Russian post-Soviet values under Mr. Putin have taken on the role of guardian of language, overseas communities in areas such as eastern Ukraine, Crimea, Georgia, and East Moldova, the Russian Orthodox Church, and officially sponsored history. In Muslim West Asia, foreign policy is religion sensitive, realpolitik packaged in the language of political Islam, though this might imply positioning rather than subscribing. Islam is a legitimizing instrument of foreign policy in that area. Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country, has attempted to use Islamic soft power in Myanmar, Afghanistan, Philippines, and the Iran-Saudi Arabia difficulties, but it has to be said with little positive result. South Korea, invaded 992 times, sees itself as a middle power in a three-way balance between the USA, China, and Japan. Survival is its main objective, and its foreign policy values are therefore only cliches. Doing good to the world, promoting national interest, contributing to humanity. China entertains no doubts at all about its centrality in world affairs, and it can never be expected to accept Western norms. Finally, I think you might wish to know what the chapter on Indian values in foreign policy has to say. To very briefly summarize its conclusions, at the time of independence, Indian foreign policy, then directed by Mr. Nehru, was based on principles derived from Buddhist and Hindu religious traditions, the worldview of Swami Vivekananda, the struggle by colonized countries against imperialism and racialism, a strong sentiment towards Asian unity, and the legacy of Gandhi's nonviolent freedom movement. These principles, which were advanced in a rhetoric that presumed high morality and universalism, very quickly foundered against the harsh realities of government responsibilities, especially the tensions with Pakistan and China. After Nehru's death, opportunism as opposed to idealism was practiced by his Congress successors. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, translated as the world is one family, has been frequently invoked throughout the decades. But many actions actually belie that belief, whether in questions of citizenship that have implications for foreign countries, or withdrawal from major trade facilitation arrangements like RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Program. An ingrained self-belief as an international paradigm and assertion of the moral high ground has existed since Indian independence. Now added to the exclusivist nature of Hindutva, this posture makes India's closer integration in a globalizing world, to my mind, much more problematic. And now to my very last word. Ideally, we should seek congruence between different value systems to forge a harmonious world based on common factors like tolerance, equal rights, and equal opportunities. The difficulty is that societies cherish different views on theologies, epistemics, and vocabularies, which makes this prospect, for the time being at least, unrealistic and unattainable. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for your great patience.
Thank you, Chris. That was nothing less was, of course, expected from you, but that was absolutely fabulous. It was very erudite and deeply analytical as well. I'm sure the audience will have a lot of points with regard to many that you have made, and also they would probably have some views as well. We have about 40 minutes, and you did it excellently to the point in time. I mean, to the second almost. 50 minutes left for discussions, questions. These need not necessarily be in the form of questions. If you have views, you can express them as well, provided you are brief. As I call upon you, I would request that you identify yourself and also your affiliation, even though I might know you, but this is for our record because everything is being recorded. Okay, the floor is now open, and I'd recognize Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chaudhry and thereafter Haider. Yeah, of course, Professor Haider. Shamsher and Haider, and then you respond.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, very nice to see you again, and welcome back to Bangladesh. Known you for a long time, and thank you for a very eloquent presentation of the very important issue of values in foreign policy. Your predecessor as Foreign Secretary, the late J.N. Dixit, a very well-known Indian foreign policy practitioner, has a number of times, especially in his book Assignment Colombo, has referred to leverage being a foreign policy tool for India, especially when it coming to countries of the region. And in some respects, I think there is a convergence of that with Robert Kaplan's first book, first book that I read, Monsoons, where he says that the larger players in the region have a bigger advantage, and the others should go along with it. The Sri Lanka experience. So, if that were to be the case, and this is not far from the post-Nehru period, was that not a big divergence from values as foreign policy? Leverage is not something that the smaller countries look at as a positive weapon, because it is then abused and misused. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I take one more, Professor Haider? Then you. Okay, all right. In which case, we will take Professor Haider, and thereafter Admiral Awal.
Thank you. It was a very erudite and masterful presentation, touching many aspects that stimulated me greatly, and I definitely will go home and read the book. Now, three questions were raised in my mind, among many others, and I will state them briefly. The first, I hope, will help me from a very self-interested point of view in my presentation this afternoon at the Bangabandhu Auditorium, since you were an ambassador to our country. I wonder how you would characterize Bangabandhu's foreign policy stance in favor of non-aligned movement, and also his UN speech of 25th of September 1974. Second question, it's more theoretical. I have been teaching for a long time at one of the leading schools of international relations in the US, and I'm frankly quite sick and tired of liberal internationalism, which has been criticized over and over again, but doesn't die. And it doesn't die because, as you rightly observed implicitly, because US is a great power. And this great power has the power, academically also, to have hegemony. So I'd like you to comment on this, but from a slightly different angle. Our chairman mentioned very sagely E.H. Carr, his famous book, 20 Years Crisis, is an important milestone in realism, which in the Western context at least began with Thucydides. Now, one could argue that there is an official realism, which is value neutral or valueless, the Kissinger type of realism. But there is also another type of realism in Thucydides, in Morgenthau, for example, even in Meersheim, where realists are very, very careful, using mostly consequentialist reasoning about what big power rivalry may lead to. That's why Meersheim's book has the title, The Tragedy of Great Powers. So could we defend normative approach modestly, perhaps, from this kind of normative realist point of view, let's call it? And the third question is about modernity and postmodernity. Postmodernism sometimes is incoherent, but people like Partha Chatterjee, whose thesis, by the way, was on mathematical politics in Rochester, and then he wrote his subaltern stuff, and Dipesh Chakraborty, whose book is Provincializing Europe. So how can we create perhaps a different kind of modernity, or I would say that the whole world is a kind of mixture of modernity, postmodernity, and pre-modernity. It applies everywhere, not just to us. So would you reflect a little bit more about the complexities of modernities and postmodernities in the plural for us?
Chris, do you think you have a plate full now, or do you want yet another question, or is this enough? Okay. 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 All right. So
let's tackle now these two questions.
yes, he wanted another one, but you see, he wanted another one, so we could take that, or perhaps you might want, because you have quite a few on your plate, actually. You might wish to, yeah. I think this is better. Shamsher and
The microphone.
Thank you very much, Shamsher. I think it's pretty obvious that every country, whether big or small, would use leverage. Leverage to enhance the prospects of promoting its own national interests or values, as the case may be. I think values themselves can be leverage, and it was certainly the case during the Cold War, when values in Western values, the American, European values, were designed, I think, to some extent, to place pressure on the East, on the Soviet Union, and to put pressure on them. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was regarded as a triumph of values. We feel sometimes that the same kind of leverage, the same kind of arguments, either spoken or unspoken, are used now by many countries against China. So I think it's in the nature of things that countries use leverage to promote their interests. Whether values are necessarily a part of that leverage or not, I have some doubts, because I think not many countries can use their value systems as leverage unless those value systems are recognized as being valid by other countries. And this is often not the case. So I would suggest that that leverage was always a realist power play rather than an exhibition of values. And when you referred to persons like one of my predecessors, Dixit, I think that his own record shows very clearly that values played very little part in his operation or modus operandi. I can give you examples, but I'm sure I don't need to do that to you. So I would say that that is probably not an example that I would cite as a values-based foreign policy. In terms of Professor Haider's 3 points, I have very little really to contribute. I think the 3 points are most valid, and I think that they could be expanded into a thesis of their own kind. As far as Sheikh Mujib's speech in the United Nations, I'm sorry, but I'm not able to identify the main points. Maybe I can be guided on that. But I would say that in terms of his foreign policy, it would be very difficult to come to any finite conclusions. Because from what little I know, and all of you know more than I do, I would say that in the relatively short term that he had as an executor of foreign policy, just 3 years, there you are, I think that it would be perhaps presumptuous to consider that many great achievements could have resulted in that time, especially, I think, when he was under such tremendous pressure. Pressure, I think, again, you know much more than I do, Professor, but I would suggest that some of the pressures were, in the initial stages, the desire for recognition, universal recognition. I think that countries like Nigeria were very reluctant to recognize independent Bangladesh for a long time. He was anxious to get the recognition of the then Organization of Islamic Conference. I think apart from that, he had serious domestic problems, especially, if I'm not mistaken, with famine. I see. Not a famine, very well, but certainly shortage of most essential commodities. And I think that given that situation, it was very hard, I think, for Sheikh Mujib to execute a well-defined foreign policy in the international community. Given more time, most likely, but during these 3.5 years, I think very difficult. In terms of realism and idealism, I think that Ambassador Chaudhry has said everything that needed to be said on that. I would just go back to what I said earlier, that in fact this debate will never end. You will always have this dichotomy between realists and idealists. In foreign policy, my own suggestion would be that realists nearly always win out, because interests are far more easy to identify and to account for than ideals. And so if you want to add up a score of successes, I think the realists usually have the upper hand. In regard to modernity, well, Professor, I think that, again, I think that I have little to add to what I said. Thank you very much for referring to Partha Chatterjee, a person I have very high regard for. I would say that it is right that all of us feel that we are modern. It is correct also that all countries feel that they are in a phase of modernity. But each person defines modernity in a different way. And I would suggest that we all arrive at different stages of modernity in our progress. And your modernity in Bangladesh may be very different from our modernity in India. So I think that it's very difficult to say that someone is pre-modern, post-modern, or not modern at all. I just was making the point, I think that that developing countries, third world, call it what you like, Asian countries, are often regarded as pre-modern by those who consider themselves post-modern. And I think that this is a rather humiliating tag, which doesn't mean anything because we're all at different stages of modernity. I think I'm referring Partha Chatterjee again at this point.
Thank you. One thing that didn't come through in his bio details was the fact that he was deeply associated with the Maulana Azad Institute in Calcutta, which is located very close to Borunde's center. And Borunde, as you would very well know, was the mentor of Partho Chatterjee. So that is one thing. The other thing, interestingly, you mentioned Thucydides syndrome or whatever. I'll tell you who makes a lot of reference to that now. The Chinese do. I mean, they keep forever citing when Athens grew strong, there was great fear in Sparta, and war was inevitable. Despite, of course, that Graham Allison's denial or rejection of that thesis. But the Chinese make a lot of, probably they refer to this big power relationship, America-China. The next two in my list, by the way, are Admiral Awal and Mr. Habibul Haq. Admiral?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Admiral Awal, associated with the Maritime Think Tank. Now, thank you very much for a very frank opinion on the Hindutva. Now, the majoritarian political discourse that India is having, leading to Hindutva, you say that it's problematic to integration with the wider world. Now, what do you think will be its impact on a rather secular foreign policy of India, of Hindutva? And in turn, what will be the impact on the neighborhood first policy of India? This is one. And another is the critics also say that the Hindutva is not in parity with that mandala theory of Chanakya. Do you agree with it? And about the value-based foreign policy, I would like to refer one question posed by the journalist after G20 summit in Japan to President Donald Trump regarding the Khashoggi murder. He said that this is what has happened. Now this is your position. Now where stands the US values and all this thing for which US stands? His reply was that he doesn't see any contradiction. He says that the oil, arms export, and regional stability, where Saudi Arabia is a big factor, is a priority for him. And Khashoggi murder is very bad. It has happened. He doesn't like it. But the priority he sees in that three components where the US vital national interest is embedded. How do you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Awal. Mr. Habibul Haq?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, let me congratulate the speaker for a very eloquent and learned statement. It touches on almost every issue that confronts the world today. And to make a short comments on one or two of them, will not make very brief statement that you have prescribed for the questions. I don't have the habit of being very brief. When I used to be the PR of Bangladesh to FAO, FAO once told me they spend more money on translating my statements than on the contribution of Bangladesh to FAO. So it's difficult for me to be very brief. First of all, I'll touch on the policy of Bangabandhu, which the question was asked and could not be answered by the speaker. Since I worked for him as Joint Secretary Cabinet, his entire tenure until his assassination. Number one is that he was a very proud man. He wanted that he should bring Bangladesh to the family of nation as a sovereign, equal friend with as many countries as he can. first of all, is India. With India, Bangabandhu was an extremely good friend of Mrs. Gandhi, but on sovereign equality basis. Initially, when we started, India was very kind enough to send district administrators to every district in Bangladesh to help our new administration. In a month or a couple of months, Bangabandhu felt that our officials were trained enough to take care of the administration of the country. And we thanked India for the gesture, but we did not need that help. Second was the security of the country. Obviously, with Indian help, without Indian help, it would not have been possible to get independence in 10 months after that genocide that Pakistan committed on Bangladeshi people. Bangabandhu made the point that with the Indian army in Bangladesh, there may be questions raised whether Bangladesh is able to administer itself without the presence of the Indian army. He made a request to Mrs. Gandhi that before he went to Calcutta, and the statement he made is a historical one. The last Indian soldier would lead our side as friends. And Mrs. Gandhi carried it out. Then he wanted to expand Bangladesh's friendship with other countries. He became a very important personality and a friend in the non-aligned movement. His friends were at that time the important people in non-aligned movements, such as Mrs. Gandhi, Boumediene of Algeria, Anwar Sadat of Egypt. People like that became his very close friends. After that, he thought that he wanted to expand because we are not a member of the UN. We are being vetoed by China over and over again. He had got the invitation for the OIC meeting to go to Lahore. There was very serious discussion in the cabinet. I can't name because I was present there, anyone. At the end of the night, not the day, Bangabandhu decided that he will go. And at about 9:30, 10, he called Mrs. Gandhi. I happened to be present there. And very friendly and politely, he said that he had decided to go because he thought it was in the best interest of his country. He did go. That opened the door for us to become a member of the United Nations. The question that the speaker raised about the famine is like this. We sold some jute goods to Cuba. The Americans say that according to PL 480, we are not eligible for food aid since we have traded with Cuba. Bangabandhu said this has been signed, and what I have signed, it will be delivered. We sent a mission to Washington. Maury Williams was the head of the USAID, and Kissinger was the Foreign Secretary, Secretary of State. They turned down. When our mission came back, and then Bangabandhu decided, in that situation, when we had hardly any money, to go to the market and to buy 900,000 tons of food we did buy that, and that was delivered. There was some delay, obviously, because we went to the market late. There has been some hardship in the northern part of Bangladesh. There have been some deaths also, but there was not a famine. Bangabandhu then decided that he will open up Bangladesh for friendship for everyone, and largely succeeded in doing so in Europe, in Americas, and also in Africa, with just some exceptions, as you mentioned, Nigeria. But he was a great friend of the General Gawan, Yakubu Gawan of Ghana, who was a very important leader there at the time in Western Africa. So in that sense, I might say what he achieved in 3.5 years in the foreign affairs, including that historic statement on the floor of the United Nations, is phenomenal. And on the administrative side, from scratch, from provincial administration to build a national administration in 3.5 years and make it effective was also a great achievement. So in that case, in sense, I remember with proud and admiration and respect for what Bangabandhu achieved in 3.5 years. Now, coming to the other points, the speaker has raised many issues, historic issues, very rich in that, but probably not that rich in giving what could be the consequences of such policies, particularly policies of self-interest first. Probably Mr. Donald Trump first had started this issue of my country first, of America first, or white first. And many other countries probably, if not saying that, practicing that kind of thing. How far that will succeed and where this will take to the world too is difficult to say. Arundhati Mukherjee made a recent statement, which I tend to agree. She said that power has a shelf life. That's why you have seen in this world civilization after civilization coming and going.
Roy, I think, Arundhati Roy. Yeah. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, right. Civilization after civilization has come and gone, including the civilization which we could say flourished very in short time in Germany, of extreme self-interest, power of the gun, and then disappeared. Mr. Donald Trump, how long he's going to last, nobody knows. But now people suspect that he might survive another 4 years. And if it does happen, God will help the world. I have to finish then what I say next. One more thing, probably. The situation in India. I'll touch on two things. India has been a secular country, to start with, the greatest secular leaders in India were Mr. Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, and Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, to name a few. The great secular people. The rule of the Gandhi family was extremely secular. Because Mr. Gandhi had wisdom and courage. I just tell a small incident. There was a meeting in the 80s between the North and the South in Cancun, Mexico. Reagan was the president then. Reagan said that the West will help the East, but some people in the East must also pull up the strings of the boots. Mrs. Gandhi immediately retorted, Mr. President, you probably don't know that many people in the East do not have boots. So there is no string to pull up. Second issue is that what occurs to me very, very strongly, that what might happen to India in the current policy being followed. The answer is there. Mahua Moitra, a very powerful speaker in the Indian Parliament, recently said in the Parliament that the situation in West Bengal is this: if we go to the villages and say how much Mamata Banerjee has been able to do, people will say that she has done a lot. But when you say that, are you going to vote for us? The answer is, I am a Hindu. Which in other words means the Hinduism or Hindutva and an Indian is probably gradually becoming synonymous. Or it is the policy of the rulers of the day to make it synonymous.
Okay,
We'll see the results.
Okay, the point is well made. I think, yeah. So I think you might want to respond to
The
both
Admiral.
of them. Yeah, the Admiral and him. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Well, taking Ambassador Huck first, which I think... to me, that's the same thing, actually. But I'm quite open to correction. But I think there's very little I need to say because he's expressed his opinions. That's perfectly valid, and I don't really have anything to say which will contradict that. I'll just say that recent elections in India perhaps are not evidence of the Hinduism of the electorate, because if the party in power at the center in the federal system of India is playing the Hindu card, and I don't disagree with that. I think that is one of the major planks. It doesn't seem that that has a great deal of traction everywhere in India, because recent elections have been almost overwhelmingly not reflective of this. If you take Delhi, if you take Haryana, if you take if you take even Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, which are big states, Maharashtra even, a big state. So you don't find that this actually is evidence that the Indian voter is unable to make a distinction between policy and religion. Of course, as he correctly said, this remains to be seen. I mean, we're in the flux of time. You don't know what's going to happen in the next election, a few years' time, etc. Neither in India nor in the United States, for that matter. But I would say that that is not a done deal, that that Hindus, BJP are synonymous. Are synonymous. I don't think that is not a conclusion one can arrive at as of now. In regard to Mr. Trump's America First, yes, I think he has a good point. You have a good point, sir. I think that most countries would say Bangladesh first, India first, Malaysia first, etc. Yes, I think that is true. That's a product of sovereignty. But I think that where the Americans do make a difference is because they have a global reach. And the America First doctrine affects all countries in the world to a greater or lesser extent. Whereas if it's Malaysia first, it doesn't have that same resonance. So I think that Donald Trump's legacy, though he's not the first, as I mentioned, America First has a long history of the United States. Theodore Roosevelt was a strong proponent of America First. But anyway, I think in recent times, America First, and even more important, the art of the deal, the strong bilateralism, you do something for me, I'll do something for you, in United States policy, is a significant departure. And I think that assuming that Mr. Trump gets another term, or he doesn't get another term, that is a factor that I think the rest of the world will have to live with for quite a long time. Because I think that his legacy, if you like, is going to remain in United States policy for many years to come. And not only the Americans, but the rest of the world will have to take very serious note of it, because it affects us all to some extent or another. In regard to the Admiral's points, I think you, in a way, I have to refresh my memory a little bit about what was said, but let me try. Hindutva and its impact on foreign policy. Hindutva was actually, a 20th century ideology propagated by persons very closely associated with the RSS, Rashtriya Sevak Sangh. And this has become the ideology of the party in power in India today. Now, Hindutva can mean many things to many people. Sometimes the practitioners take a very, what might say, diminished or modified definition of the term, which seems to be perfectly acceptable. But at other times it seems very harsh and exclusive. I think that Hindutva's effect on foreign policy has not yet been felt, except perhaps in terms of relations with Israel. I think that one of the leaders of the Hindutva theory of the 20th century, Mr. Sarwarkar, was a very strong proponent of Israel because, to my estimation, it was a state founded on religion. And the inhabitants of that state, a newly created state, all came from one particular religion which was considered to be the state religion. Now, I think that that has been reflected in the present government's very strong relationship with Israel. I think that there's no great evidence of any further indications of Hindutva playing a role. For example, many people would say that relations between India and the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, and with many of the neighboring Muslim countries, such as Bangladesh, have been very cordial of late under this government. So it is a little sort of contra-indicative in a way. I don't think, therefore, we have to wait a little bit longer to see, firstly, whether this philosophy will continue as a part of the ruling party's ideology in India, and secondly, what effect it really does have. If you're speaking of domestic policies, domestic acts of parliament which affect neighboring countries, I think that is something for a separate discussion. If you're speaking of citizenship laws, the National Register of Citizens, etc., I think that is something we have to consider separately. In regard to Khashoggi and the United States, yes, I would agree with you. I think it's a clear case of maybe interest prevailing over ideals or values. And I think that many other countries also, keeping in mind their relationship with Saudi Arabia, and particularly the economic relations with Saudi Arabians and their close allies in the Gulf, that is UAE and Bahrain, I think have been anxious to downplay the Khashoggi incident, including India, I might say. So I think it's not something that we could only point to the United States for, because I think Mr. Khashoggi was not actually a United States citizen. So he was a permanent resident, but not a citizen. So I think that we can tar the United States with that brush, but many other countries would get similarly tarred as well. I'm sorry, I think that I've lost your Mandala point. Yes, Chanakya and Kautilya. Frankly, sir, I'm not enthusiastic about references to Kautilya or Chanakya. I think there is no evidence whatsoever that, I know that many people will jump on me in India for saying this, but there's no evidence whatsoever that his doctrines, Arthashastra, had any bearing on Indian government at any time. So this is all a retrospective myth created by the discovery of a manuscript, I think at the end of the 19th century or early 20th century. So this is all retrospective philosophy, and I don't subscribe to it. So I think that there's been no such mandala theory in
no such person, did you say?
No, there's such a person, but I don't believe there's been any kind of mandala theory attributed to Chanakya stroke Kautilya. Because I think that while the man may have existed, I don't think his doctrines, which were exhumed several centuries after his death, have ever had any validity or valence in India at all. I think that's all I need to say for this subject.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just on that point, Croce said all history is modern. You see, so Mandala, for instance, I mean, there is a resurgence of interest in Kautilya and Chanakya now, because there are a couple of books that have come out, largely also based from Heidelberg. But the point is, the Mandala is that you are your enemy's, very crudely put, your enemy's friend is your friend, beyond this thing. So it's a bit of a Indianization of Machiavellian ideas to a certain extent. Enemy is your friend. But Machiavelli, of course, the revisionist history argues that Machiavelli, while writing to teach the prince, actually gave great lessons to the people. You see, so there are all kinds of these things. With regard to your points, of course, you mentioned Mohia Moitra, and let me tell you that our speaker does not necessarily represent what you critiqued. He does not represent that point of view in any way. But Mohua Maitra and Adhir Chaudhary, people like that of that ilk, have great cheerleaders in many parts of the world, even in Singapore, and people follow what they're doing in Lok Sabha. You mentioned a list of Indian luminaries who are liberals, in which you mentioned Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das. I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that our speaker is very closely connected with Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das. Okay.
By relation.
By relations. He married into the family of Chittaranjan Das. Okay, two more speakers, the last ones, I think. We have Dr. Fazul Islam, three. Fazul Islam Chaudhary, we'll take them very quickly. Fazul Islam Chaudhary, Barrister Ziaur Rahman, and you. Okay. Fazul Islam Chaudhary. Very quickly, we'd like to end in about 15 minutes.
First of all, I appreciate the three school of thought of development of values by Dr. Chaudhary, Iftikhar Chaudhary, and I also appreciate Mr. Srinivasan for vivid description of the values in foreign policy. Our today's topic has got two parts. One is values in foreign policy, another their absence in foreign policy. I think that part is not described. I'll give some hints regarding that part, their absence in foreign policy. I start where Mr. Vasan ends. Mr. Vasan ends with three components, three factors for the development of the values. One is tolerance, another is opportunity, another is right. The tolerance, the whole world is non-tolerant today. Opportunity, this is not universally distributed. And right, still the old phenomenon, might is right, in different forms, in form of the muscle, in the form of the religion, in the form of the money. That's why I think whether our today's discussion of the values is whether it is valuable or valueless, I don't know. What should be the idea? What should be the target of our world nation? Whether it is peace or war. What we are seeing everywhere there is non-humanitarian side, or everywhere there is sounds of war. And the values regarding the values, what are the principles of the value? What is the definition of the values? Values can be defined as the principles which moves the inner wheel of the mind. The mind has got two wheels, inner wheel and outer wheel. In inner wheel there are some important factors that move the mind, and the outer wheel is distorted. If inner wheel there is safety, and outer wheel this is distorted, and there the behavior pattern arises in that way. And I think the values, what should be the component regarding the development of the values? The components are aligned within the word human. H for the honor, we have to honor the whole, one man honors another one. We have the human, unity, we have maintain the unity. And M, might should not be the right. I remember one sentence in the March discussion with Mr. Yahya Khan and our Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. After discussion, when discussion ends, possibly that was 20th March, Tajuddin said that to our journalist that might is not right. But what we are seeing, then human, might should not be right, and arts, the arts should be development of the arts, and the need, one is the need responsive society in the nation. Whether we fulfill these things, I don't know. After all, we are in a happy mood that we are discussing whether this is practical or impractical. Last of all, it's my great pleasure to say something regarding this portion of the values. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. Zia, with your permission, could I give him the floor first so that you wrap up you make the last few remarks? Okay. You will identify your affiliation and name, please, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is Mr. Alamgir Hossain. I'm from Bangladesh Heritage Foundation. I'm coming on behalf of Mr. Ambassador Wali Rahman. Thank you, Mr. Honorable Speaker, for your erudite speech, and thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'm not going to make a question, but rather I'll make two remarks, if you allow me.
Two short remarks, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is Asian century, and it is reality, and it is going to be under the leadership of China, and at this time, China is number one at GDP at PPP, while USA is second in GDP at PPP.
It's correct, yes.
At GDP at PPP.
Purchasing power parity. He's right.
Purchasing power parity. PPP. GDP at PPP, purchasing power parity. Okay. But many say that US and the West cannot accept this. And they all time want that Asians and the rest will be the consumer of their products, consumer of their modernity. And in this go, many think that the coronavirus, they define the basis of coronavirus on the basis of conspiracy theory, and that is from the West. And so, when the concept of Western supremacy, the idea of nostalgic romanticism of West that has they exercised in the past will not be over, the idea of universal exercise of value-based foreign policy will be an empty broach. That is my first remark. And my second remark is, in the consideration of US value-based foreign policy, the most idea is liberal democracy. When the small states, their objective is to only survive. In this go, they cannot but accept the stigma of the West. So, while they are facing different problems in their internal issues, like political problems and some other problems, and so they are facing different problems in the way of transition to development that creates various problems. So, the idea of universal values do not work. What works? That is the argument or the idea of Lord Palmerston, that is national interest in case for the Western powers. And for the rest, this doesn't work. And this creates refugee and some other problems. And this remains unsettled. So in this regard, what I'm suggesting.
Okay. I'm suggesting something.
Yeah. As the value and some other issues, ideals is not defined. So, sir,
If you have a question, do you
No, sir.
Ask a question, please.
No, sir.
All right.
I have no any question, but I'm.
Okay, we have just one more. We're 12:50.
I think we're running short out.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think we are all agreed that all foreign policy of any nation is based on enlightened self-interest. So the questions of morality and other things frequently used to bolster an argument, but never really relied on. So whether it's morality or values, as you've today titled today's discussion in itself, that values or their absence in foreign policy, there is no value. There has never been, I think from the word go, there has never been any value in any country throughout history, as I'm sure most of us will know. It has never been dictated by any altruism or any motives of goodwill to help a nation besides me to achieve the best interests. It is always to serve my best interest, not the other person's. I'm not going to waste my time, money, or energy in educating or assisting another nation to go up in the world. And despite the hollow platitudes sung by the Americans for the last century or so of trying to help the rest of the world, it has never been true. It has never been true. And even today it is not true, because then the Americans have been behind, motivated, encouraged, assisted, and sent arms for the starting and continuation of numerous wars throughout the world today. Although we are supposed to believe that we are living in an age of peace, because the Second World War ended. With the ending of the Second World War, we have the United Nations, the war to end all wars, and to prevent this scourge from visiting humanity anymore. But the Americans have been fighting numerous wars throughout the world, assisting, helping, sending arms, and so forth. The arms industry in America will not continue otherwise. So now, the question of whether foreign policy, as we keep saying frequently, of foreign policy, and even our foreign policies frequently seem to be dictated by another power. We are not even free to decide on our own foreign policy. So, as it is, even if we're dictated by foreign powers, and as we can see that the two biggest so-called democracies that we look to are both retreating from their democratic ideals, if there was any to start with. Both the United States and India are on the retreat from what democracy held out for us, or what we believed was democracy. Because in America we hear today, we do not hear free enterprise anymore. We hear today a fair enterprise. Why? Because they're not winning the game of free enterprise anymore. So it is not a question of goodness, altruism, democracy, and freedoms. It is not freedoms that the Western powers want. It is control over others. And it is the American desire to control, and even if there is going to be a democracy, like in Palestine, there was an election and the wrong party won, as far as the Americans are concerned. The wrong party won. So they immediately decided to have that election cancelled, or they advocated the election should be set aside, and they never accepted it. Even till today, they haven't accepted that there was a free, fair, or normal election in that country. So we have to accept the fact that this is the world we live in. There is no question of fairness. There is no integrity in foreign policy. It is, as somebody I think said, that might is not right and so forth. Might has of course been right. It always has been right. Since Roman times, since Greek times, since the Persians, it has always been right. And today also we are living on the same situation, and we can see the fear that we have as a small country tucked away in a corner of South Asia. The fear that we have today is we were trying to cling to democratic principles and norms, such as they are. And we can see today that the guidance that we seek from other so-called democratic nations are eroding. There is a tremendous erosion of democratic principles, values, and so forth. So where we are supposed to be following them, taking lessons from them, or being guided by them, it is no longer in existence anymore. And it is no point in the Europeans and the Americans preaching to the rest of the world liberalism and democracy, which they don't pursue themselves. So essentially, it was not, my idea was not to set any questions to Mr. Srinivasan. It was to open up another line of thinking that this is the way it has been, and it is the way that we have to perceive it and act on that basis. So if we say that foreign policy or absence of any values in foreign policy, we have to take it as a given to start any further discussion. My argument is essentially that.
Jolly good. Okay. You take the next 5 minutes or so. Or
I won't need that much.
Okay. And then I will wrap it up by time.
Well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for your interest in asking some questions. I'm greatly appreciative of that. As far as the first speaker was concerned, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name, but you know, the question really is, you're posing the question, what is the value of values? Now, I think that is a very important question, but I think we've got to appreciate that all governments, whether they're of extreme right or extreme left or centrist, do like to claim that their policies are something more than just opportunist. I think that they like to claim that they are based on certain ideologies, values if you like, because values are ideals. They're not necessarily practical. They're things, they're aspirational. So I think that if you say what value have they got, I would say the value is that they are evocative of a man or woman's desire for a better way of existence. And that is what both governments and individuals try to do. So I don't question ipso facto the existence of values. Now, if you completely rule out value systems in politics, how then do you evaluate results? Do you evaluate results only by consequences that any action that a government takes results in a de facto situation that you accept without any judgment? I don't think that that is really a desirable conclusion that I would come to. Let me just take one example. Trump probably feels that, sorry we keep talking about Mr. Trump, but it's very good to use this as an illustration. Now, Mr. Trump probably feels that his actions regarding terminating the agreement with Iran to be very successful. I mean, from his point of view, it is a tremendous success, and it appeals to his supporters in the United States, and he hopes that actions such as this are going to propel him to a second term in office. Now, from a value system, to abrogate an agreement which has been signed by both governments and endorsed by the Security Council is an invalid act. And so, I mean, is it invalid only because it's been done with a particular purpose by one of the participants to that agreement? Or is it valid because it sustains the United States decision that that Iran is, quote unquote, a propagator of terrorism, a malign influence in the Middle East, etc.? I think that surely we do exercise some value judgments in arriving at our conclusions about this action. So I would say that the values do certainly have values. Now, in regard to your point, Barrister, you know, I cannot argue or I cannot dispute any argument made by a barrister. I'm unqualified. But let me just say, you know, you speak of enlightened self-interest, but what does enlightened mean? If you don't apply a value system, where is the question of light? Where is the question of enlightenment? So no, but I think no.
I'm trying to be polite. I'm not saying that I'm a Newton.
You're very polite. Except that.
Selfish self-interest.
Except that. I think that I mean, there's a lot of what you said which I would agree with, except that you put it rather more forcefully and more stringently than I would have put it. And I would still come back to the point that if you say enlightened self-interest, that you are automatically using a value system to make that definition. Now, I'd say the usefulness of values for politicians is this, that public opinion is much moved by the fact that the people they vote for have a set of values. I think that therefore it serves every political party to formulate a set of values because it appeals to the domestic population which votes them into power. And I think that that is one of the primary purposes why values will continue to be in existence, because it serves a very important, and I would say, frankly, not replaceable element of a political system. Whether it is China or whether it is France, it doesn't matter what political system you're referring to. If a government professes to be completely bereft of a value system, however much of a fig leaf that might be, I think that it will lose a lot of domestic popularity. So I think that we are going to have values in politics as long as politics continues. If you allow me also, I will dispute the fact that you say that Indian democracy is fragile or perhaps doesn't exist. Now, yes, now, today. I'm not a spokesman for...
Erosion. I didn't say it is not there. Erosion of democratic.
Many factors which would count in my response to that would be your definition of democracy. Now, by any common or garden layman's definition of democracy, India is a democracy and it has not been eroded. I'm not a spokesman for any political party in India, least of all the government of India, but certainly some essential elements of the democratic process as we understand them still continue in India reasonably robustly, but there is no such thing as a perfect democracy in anywhere in the world, as you know, in this country as well as I do. And I think that as far as all the trials and tribulations that India has had for 70 years, I think that the Indian democratic system is robust. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot made about Trump and values, I think. A quote from Oscar Wilde comes to mind. He said about someone that so-and-so knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. Anyhow, I thought it was a tremendously interesting discussion today. It was a thematic subject, of course, a difficult thematic subject. I thought there were two discussions going on, one stated and the other unstated. You would have expected, Chris, that if whether you belong to Lithuanians India or not, the saffronized India or not, you would have faced many of these questions. Many were asked, many were unasked. But I thought it went very well while attempting to discuss the topics which are formally mentioned. Many informal discussions were carried out in response to the sometimes unstated queries in the minds of many of our participants as to what is happening in the neighborhood in India. And I think this was very well done. I should like to thank everyone for the contributions, of course, which all of you have, as you have always done in the past, helped to make our event a success. I would most certainly thank you, Chris, for your erudition, for your coverage of a totality of a subject within 40 minutes, which was a huge intellectual challenge, but I thought you carried it out very well. And you and your outfit, I mean, thank you very much for the contribution you make to raising the enlightenment of the Dhaka thinking crowd. These thinkers are also influencers of policies, and which is why our idea of getting you together is so that when you interact, you also influence those who make policies for us toward aiming at the betterment of our lives and also improvement, particularly of our foundation, improvement of our relations with others in the international community, and that is what we seek and try to achieve. With these words, I will hand over the floor to you to do whatever you wish to do in the next 5-10 minutes.
First of all, I would really like to thank Chris Srinivasan. I think this was way and beyond at least my expectation, but what I would learn about values and foreign policy. So thank you very much. And I think the audience have been very engaging, and I think it's been a very, very rewarding experience for me and as well as all the audience. And I really want to thank you for taking the trouble to visit Bangladesh, and I hope you will come again soon with a little bit more exciting subject which is relevant to our part of the world. And I think this topic is something which goes beyond foreign policy and the values. When we are losing values, values. And I think another thing that you said, which is that it's a very dynamic thing. The values, the whole aspect of the value thing is so broad and so, vast that that in just one session one couldn't address all the concerns and of each individual in this room. I'm also very much thankful for the participants, and especially for my friend, especially Haider, who traveled from states. We are childhood friends, and I think you asked some very, very intelligent remarks and questions, and I hope you will continue to support our foundation. And by the way, Haider has been the first speaker of the Cosmos Dialogue in Bangladesh. That was about 4 years ago almost, but time really flies. And thank you. Now it's time to have some lunch upstairs, and during the lunch I would encourage everybody to network and exchange views. And thank you. And next week we have this event, the Nordic Bangladesh event, and I'm sure that would be very exciting too. Thank you. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you, everybody, again for your presence and participation. Now we have a little token of appreciation for our honored panelists. So I would request Inatullah